Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was a failed super soldier, but kept trying anyway. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for Izuku Midoriya, had always been a place of deafening noise and vibrant color, a sensory overload he absorbed with an almost painful intensity. He saw the world in vectors and stress points, in the subtle tells of a hero's posture before they launched an attack, in the precise angle of a villain's retreat. He heard it in the Doppler shift of a speeding hero's battle cry and the low-frequency rumble of a construction mech stabilizing a damaged building. His quirklessness had been a void, a silence in his own biology, and he had filled that silence with observation. He watched, he listened, he learned, and he wrote. His notebooks, currently numbering 14, were the testament. They were his grimoires, filled with frantic, meticulous scrawls that charted the landscape of modern heroism. Tonight, however, the world had gone quiet. The usual symphony of Muzurifu, the distant sirens, the hum of the elevated train, the chatter from the street below his apartment window, was a muffled backdrop to the single, overwhelming sound of his own heart hammering against his ribs. It had started an hour ago. A black, unmarked car, silent as a panther, had pulled up to his apartment complex. Two figures in severe, dark suits had knocked on his door. They hadn't been police or government agents, not in the typical sense. They carried an air of authority that was older, heavier, and far more discreet. They had a single message for his mother, who had answered the door with a trembling hand held to her mouth. "Inko Midoriya? We are here for Izuku Midoriya. He has been selected. The Hero Public Safety Commission requests his immediate presence for a matter of national importance. It concerns All Might." That name was a key, unlocking a torrent of fear and awe in the small apartment. His mother, bless her soul, had oscillated between panicked questions and a strange, tearful pride. Izuku had simply stood frozen in the hallway, a half-dusted All Might figurine, Silver Age edition, still in his hand. Now, he sat on the plush leather of the car's back seat, the city lights streaking past the tinted window in blurry ribbons of neon. He was alone. The silent men sat in the front, separated by a thick pane of glass. He could see their silhouettes, rigid and professional. They hadn't spoken a word to him since he'd entered the vehicle. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on him, forcing the air from his lungs. Where were they going? What could the HPSC possibly want with him? A quirkless, 15-year-old boy whose only achievements were perfect test scores and a fanatical knowledge of heroes. The mention of All Might was the part that truly terrified him. He had met his idol, had been saved by him, had even been privy to the secret of his devastating injury. But that had been months ago. A desperate, heartfelt rooftop conversation that had ended with the crushing, yet kind, finality. Without a quirk, you cannot become a hero. Had something happened? Was All Might worse? The car descended, spiraling down a long, subterranean ramp into a place that did not seem to exist on any public map. The pressure in his ears popped. Fluorescent lights flickered on, revealing a vast, sterile garage of polished concrete. The doors hissed open and one of the men finally spoke, his voice as starched as his suit. "This way, Midoriya-san." Izuku's legs felt like lead as he followed. They walked through a series of corridors that smelled of antiseptic and ozone. The walls were a stark, institutional white, the floors buffed to a mirror shine. Keycard scanners beeped and whirred at every checkpoint, the silent guards inside their reinforced booths nodding as they passed. This was a place of immense power and secrecy, the hidden nerve center of the hero world. And he, Izuku Midoriya, was walking through it as if he belonged. The absurdity of it was almost enough to make him laugh, if he wasn't so petrified. They stopped before a set of imposing, blast-proof steel doors. The guard gestured. "He is expected." Izuku took a shaky breath, the kind you take before diving into deep water, and pushed the door open. The room was as cold and intimidating as the rest of the facility. At its center was a long, obsidian black table, so polished it reflected the single, stark bar of light on the ceiling above, making it look like a floating rectangle of pure white. At the far end of the table sat a woman with sharp, severe features and silver hair pulled back into a tight, unforgiving bun. Her suit was immaculate, her posture exuded an aura of absolute control. She was the picture of bureaucratic authority, but it was the man sitting to her right that stole Izuku's breath. It was Toshinori Yagi. Not All Might, the towering pillar of muscle and charisma, but the skeletal, sunken-eyed man he truly was. He was hunched slightly, a wisp of steam rising from the teacup held in his long, thin fingers. When he saw Izuku, a faint, tired smile touched his lips, but his eyes were filled with a profound, almost painful gravity. "Midoriya, my boy," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Izuku moved numbly, pulling out a chair that felt far too heavy and sinking into it. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He could feel the woman's eyes on him, analytical and unblinking, like a biologist studying a new specimen. Finally, she spoke, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "Izuku Midoriya. Age 15. Quirk none. Academically, you are in the top 1 percentile nationwide. Your physical scores are adequate for a civilian. But what makes you unique, and the reason you are sitting at this table, are your analytical capabilities. We have reviewed your files, the ones you believe are private hobbyist notebooks. Notebooks for the future, number 1 through 13. We are aware of the 14th, which you began last month." Izuku's blood ran cold. They had his notebooks. They had read them. His private thoughts, his frantic analyses, his crazy theories, all laid bare before the highest authority in the country. He felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. "Those are just my hobby," he stammered, his voice barely a squeak. The woman, who he now assumed was the president of the HPSC, offered a thin, dismissive smile. "A hobby that provides more insightful tactical analysis than some of our paid, professional strategists. You deconstruct quirks, support gear, and team dynamics with a frightening level of precision. But more than that, you theorize. You extrapolate. You see the potential, the next logical step." She leaned forward, her fingers steepling on the table. "Which brings us to why you are here. Mr. Yagi, if you would." Toshinori set his teacup down with a soft click. He looked at Izuku, his gaze steady and serious. "Midoriya, my boy. You know my condition. You know that I am running out of time. The flame that I carry is guttering, and soon it will go out. For years, the world has had a symbol of peace. But a symbol is only as strong as the reality it represents. When I am gone, the crime rates that I have suppressed for decades will skyrocket. The villains will grow bold. The world will be plunged back into an era of fear. A new symbol is needed." Izuku nodded, his throat tight. He knew all this. He'd agonized over it in the lonely hours of the night. "My quirk, one for all, was meant to be passed on," Toshinori continued, his voice dropping lower. "But the injury I sustained, it has created complications. The transfer would be unstable, dangerous to a recipient who already possesses a quirk. We searched for a quirkless candidate, someone strong of body and pure of heart, but the search was fruitless. Until now." Izuku's brow furrowed in confusion. "But you told me. I couldn't. I told you that you could not be a hero without a power," Toshinori corrected gently. "I did not say a power could not be given to you." The HPSC president took over, her tone clinical and direct. "What you are about to be told is a state secret of the highest possible classification. To speak of it to anyone, your mother, your friends, anyone, would be an act of treason. Do you understand, Midoriya?" Izuku could only manage a jerky, terrified nod. "Very well," she said. "Decades ago, before quirks were fully understood and stabilized, a joint effort between the Japanese government and international research partners was initiated. It was a program to create the perfect soldier, the ultimate hero, where one did not exist. A bioenhancement serum designed to grant a quirkless individual superhuman levels of strength, speed, stamina, and cellular regeneration. The official name was Project Plus Ultra." Izuku's eyes widened. Plus Ultra. All Might's catchphrase. It wasn't just a motto. It was a project name. The project had many failures, the president continued, her voice a flat monotone. But it had one spectacular success. She gestured with her chin towards the frail man beside her. An early, stable version of the serum was administered to a young, quirkless man with an indomitable will to save others. Toshinori Yagi. The world tilted on its axis. Izuku stared at his hero, his mind reeling. All Might wasn't born with his power. He wasn't the eighth holder of One for All in the way Izuku had imagined. His power wasn't a quirk, not truly. It was science. He was a super soldier. A creation. The serum gave me the strength, Toshinori confirmed, seeing the shock on Izuku's face. The quirk I inherited, One for All, is a torch. It stockpiles power. The serum built me a body strong enough to hold that torch without being incinerated by its flame. The two became one and the same. They created All Might, a success we have been trying to replicate for years. The president cut in. My predecessors believed that a new, enhanced version of the serum, combined with the stockpiled power of One for All, could create a hero even greater than the original. But after Mr. Yagi's injury, the focus shifted. The serum alone could no longer fully heal him. His time is limited. Passing on One for All is now too risky. So, we are reverting to the original plan. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle in the silent room. We will create a new symbol of peace using the perfected plus ultra serum. We have the technology. We have the formula. All we needed was the right candidate. A quirkless individual, physically sound, mentally resilient, with the unimpeachable moral compass required to wield such power. We searched for years. We found no one, and then, she gave a slight nod toward Toshinori. Our current All Might brought your name to our attention. Izuku felt like he was going to pass out. His vision swam. He gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. Him? They were talking about him? Me? He whispered, the word fragile. But I'm nothing. I'm just Deku. No, Toshinori said, his voice ringing with a sudden, fierce conviction that was pure All Might. You are the boy who, with no power to his name, with no hope of victory, ran into the face of death to try and save another. I told the commission about the sludge villain. I told them how every pro-hero at the scene, myself included, stood frozen. But you, a quirkless child, were the only one who moved. That, Midoriya, is the spirit of a true hero. It is the one thing the serum cannot grant. It is the one thing that must already be there. The president, Yoroi, watched him with her hawk-like gaze. Your psychological profile is fascinating. A textbook inferiority complex, yet paradoxically, an unwavering and almost reckless desire to self-sacrifice for the good of others. It is the perfect foundation. Your body is a blank slate. Your spirit is a forge. We believe you are the one. She slid a sleek, black datapad across the table. We want to offer you the chance to become the next super soldier. The next symbol of peace. We want you to be the recipient of Project Plus Ultra. Izuku stared at the datapad. On its screen was a complex biochemical diagram, spiraling like a strand of DNA, glowing with a soft blue light. Underneath it the words Project Plus Ultra Candidate Profile, Izuku Midoriya. For his entire life, the world had told him what he couldn't be. You're quirkless. You can't be a hero. Give up on your dream. Be realistic. His childhood friend, his teachers, his doctor, even his own idol had delivered the same verdict. His dream was impossible. And now, in the deepest, most secret sanctum of power in Japan, the very people who defined what a hero was were telling him the exact opposite. They weren't just saying he could be a hero. They were saying he was the only one who could be the greatest hero. The whiplash was so severe it felt like a physical blow. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and sudden. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a hope so fierce and overwhelming it was painful. A dam inside him that had held back 15 years of yearning and despair finally burst. He couldn't speak. He just sobbed, his shoulders shaking, his head bowed as he stared at his own name on that screen. After he had composed himself, a process that took several long, embarrassing minutes, President Yoroi's skepticism seemed to have softened, if only by a fraction of a degree. Your emotional response is noted, she said, though it sounded more like a clinical observation than a reassurance. But sentiment will not make the project a success. Your mind will. Mr. Yagi insists your analytical skills are your greatest asset. Prove it. On that datapad is the public-facing case file of the recent hostage situation involving the villain, Slugger. Izuku's head snapped up. Slugger was a low-level villain with a quirk that let him transform his arms into dense, concrete bats. He'd taken a dozen people hostage in a bank 2 weeks ago. The situation was resolved by the hero team of Death Arms and Kamui Woods. I remember it, Izuku said, his voice still thick with emotion. He swiped the screen, and the file opened. Police reports, hero statements, news clippings. Give us your assessment, Yoro commanded. What did they do right? What did they do wrong? What would you have done differently? This he knew. This was his language. The emotional storm inside him calmed, replaced by the familiar, focused hum of analysis. He scrolled through the files, his eyes scanning paragraphs in seconds, absorbing schematics of the bank, witness testimonies, and a power analysis of Slugger's quirk. They approached it as a power problem, Izuku began, his voice gaining confidence. Slugger's quirk is strong, but slow and cumbersome. Death Arm's job was to match him for strength, a direct confrontation. Kamui Woods was tasked with rescue and containment using his lacquered chain prison. Standard procedure for this type of threat. He tapped the screen, bringing up a blueprint of the bank. But they missed the environmental factors. The bank was a new construction. According to the city permits here, it used high-tensile steel supports, not reinforced concrete, which is unusual for a building of this size. Slugger's bats are concrete. Against steel, he'd have minimal structural damage capability. Death Arms engaged him in the main lobby, which has marble flooring and plaster walls, all things Slugger could easily destroy, creating debris, confusion, and leverage. It made him look more threatening than he was. Taishinori listened intently, a small smile growing on his face. President Yoroi remained impassive, but her eyes were sharp. Kamui Woods' lacquered chain prison is effective for single-target capture, but in a wide, open space like the lobby, it's slow to deploy and has multiple points of failure. The hostages were scattered. Kamui had to prioritize, which gave Slugger time to use them as shields. And your solution, Midoriya? Yoroi asked, her voice cutting. Don't engage in the lobby, Izuku said immediately. The primary goal is hostage safety. You create a diversion at the front entrance, a sonic flash, anything to draw his attention. Then, you breach from the rear, through the vault. The report says the vault door was a classic circular pressure door. It's thick, but it's a single point. A hero with a precise cutting quirk, like fourth kind's subordinate, could have bypassed it in under a minute. Once inside the vault, you have a secure, fortified position. You evacuate the hostages through there, away from the main confrontation. Slugger is left alone in the lobby, his leverage gone. At that point, he's just a thug with heavy arms in a big, empty room. Easily contained. He looked up, his face flushed with the excitement of the mental exercise. It shouldn't have taken 2 hours. With the right strategy, it could have been over in 15 minutes, with zero collateral damage. The room was silent for a moment. Then Yoroi gave a curt, single nod. Adequate. Coming from her, it felt like high praise. Now, she said, changing the subject with startling speed, apply that same thinking to the project. To the serum. What are your thoughts? Izuku blinked. They wanted his analysis. On the super soldier serum? He scrolled to the next file on the datapad. It was a declassified overview of the serum's properties. Accelerated metabolism, enhanced protein synthesis, myostatin inhibition, rapid cellular division for healing. It was the stuff of science fiction, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He didn't just see words, he saw pathways. He saw potential. It's a cascade, he breathed, his fingers tracing the diagrams on the screen. It doesn't just build muscle, it rewrites the body's entire energy economy. The metabolic acceleration is the engine. To fuel it, you need an incredible caloric intake, upwards of 10 to 15,000 calories a day, just to maintain mass. But the efficiency is the key. The serum must also enhance mitochondrial function, increasing ATP production on a cellular level. It's not just a bigger engine, it's a more fuel-efficient one. He started muttering, his mind racing faster than his mouth could keep up. The healing factor, it's based on cellular division, but that's dangerous. Unchecked, that leads to tumors, to cancer. There must be a telomere-stabilizing agent in the formula, something to prevent cellular degradation from rapid replication, and the kinetic energy distribution. To punch with the force of a freight train, the user's own skeletal structure would shatter. The serum has to increase bone density, yes, but it must also reinforce connective tissues, turning ligaments and tendons into something like carbon fiber cables to manage the torque and impact. It's a total systemic overhaul. He looked up from the datapad, his eyes blazing with a fire Yoroi hadn't seen before. It wasn't the look of a weepy fanboy anymore. It was the look of a scholar who had just been handed the Holy Grail. "This is the most brilliant piece of bioengineering I have ever seen," he said, his voice filled with pure, unadulterated awe. "The potential applications, beyond just creating a hero, it could cure degenerative muscular diseases, heal catastrophic injuries. It's a miracle." Tashinori's smile was wide now, full of pride. He looked at Yoroi, who for the first time seemed to allow a flicker of something other than cold calculation to cross her face. It might have been surprise, or even respect. "As you can see, President," Tashinori said softly, "he understands. Not just the honor or the power. He understands the science. The responsibility. He sees the whole picture." Yoroi stood up, the movement crisp and final. "Izuku Midoriya, you will be transferred to a secure HPSC medical facility for final evaluation and conditioning. The procedure will take place in 1 week. You will have no contact with the outside world. This is your last chance to decline. Once you enter that facility, you are committed. You will cease to be Izuku Midoriya, the student. You will become Project Plus Ultra Soul Candidate. Your life, as you know it, is over." Is that understood? Was he scared? He was terrified. He was leaving his mother, his life, everything he knew, for a chance that felt too big, too bright to be real. But it was real. The datapad was still warm in his hands. Tashinori's proud gaze was a physical force, bolstering him. The dream that he had been forced to kill and bury was not only alive, it was roaring. He pushed his chair back and stood, trying to mimic the president's rigid posture. He looked her right in the eye. "Yes," Izuku said, his voice clear and steady, betraying none of the chaos in his chest. "I understand. I accept." The private conversation with Tashinori happened an hour later. After President Yoroi and her aides had departed, leaving them alone in the vast, silent room, Tashinori led him to a small, private observation deck. The reinforced glass looked out over the glittering expanse of the city at night. It was a god's eye view, a vantage point of immense power. Tashinori sagged onto a bench, the brief burst of energy he'd shown earlier seemingly deserting him. He coughed, a racking sound, and dabbed his mouth with a handkerchief. "I owe you an apology, my boy," he began, his voice raspy. Izuku was stunned. "What? For what?" "You're giving me everything. I am placing the weight of the world on the shoulders of a 15-year-old boy," Tashinori said, his gaze fixed on the city below. "I am asking you to sacrifice your childhood, your name, your entire life, to fix a problem that my predecessors, created. It is a terrible burden, and I feel the weight of it, perhaps more than you do right now." He turned to face Izuku, his blue eyes piercing in the dim light. "President Yoroi and the Commission, they see your data. They see your analysis, your biology, your psychological profile. They see a viable candidate, a set of desirable variables. But that is not why I chose you. I chose you because of what I saw that day." He didn't need to specify which day. It was burned into both of their memories. "I saw your legs move when you had every reason to stay put. I saw fear in your eyes, but it was a secondary emotion. The primary one was an absolute, instinctual need to save someone. It was the purest form of heroism I have witnessed in my entire life. More than any pro, more than any sidekick. That is not something that can be taught. It cannot be engineered in a lab or programmed by a committee." He reached out a bony hand and placed it on Izuku's shoulder. His grip was surprisingly firm. "Your spirit, my boy, it's already a superpower. The serum, the project, all of it, it's just giving your spirit a body that can keep up with it. Never forget that. When the training is hard, when the pain feels unbearable, when you feel like you are losing yourself to the power, you remember that boy by the underpass. He is the core of who you are. He is the hero. The tears were back, but this time Izuku didn't feel ashamed. He felt anointed. Validated in a way that washed away years of taunts and self-doubt. The words he had longed to hear his entire life were being spoken by the one person who mattered most. I won't let you down, All Might. Izuku swore, his voice thick. I'll work hard. I'll be the symbol they need. I promise. Toshinori smiled, a genuine, warm expression that lit up his gaunt features. I know you will. Now get some rest. Your life is about to change forever. The next week was a blur of sterile white rooms, humming machinery, and the detached, professional voices of doctors and psychologists. Izuku was an asset, a project, a specimen. He was poked, prodded, and scanned. They took enough blood to feed a vampire colony. He was put through grueling physical stress tests on advanced treadmills and weight machines, his every vital sign monitored on a dozen screens. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, then pushed himself to run further. He held weights until his muscles screamed and tore, then held them for 10 seconds longer. The staff noted his extraordinary pain tolerance and willpower, marking it down as another positive variable on his chart. The psychological evaluations were more draining. They showed him images of tragedy and triumph, gauging his empathetic responses. They put him in simulations, forcing him to make impossible choices, save a train full of people or save a single child. Who do you sacrifice? There were no right answers, only the lesser of two evils. He answered honestly, tearfully, explaining his logic with the same analytical fervor he applied to hero fights. He ate tasteless, high-protein nutrient paste and slept in a room that was more of a medical bay than a bedroom. He was utterly alone, adrift in a sea of clinical procedure. The only thing that kept him anchored was Toshinori's voice in his head. Your spirit is already a superpower. On the final night, the eve of the procedure, he was allowed a moment to himself. The endless tests were over. He stood in his room, wearing the simple, gray medical scrubs they'd given him. He caught his reflection in the polished chrome of a medical instrument panel. He saw a boy. Pale from the lack of sunlight, with dark circles under his eyes from exhaustion. His green hair was an untamed mess, and his freckles stood out starkly against his skin. He looked small and fragile. He looked like Deku, the useless boy who couldn't do anything. But then he looked deeper, into his own eyes. And he saw something new there. A glint of steel. A spark that had been fanned into a steady, burning flame over the past week. It was the certainty of his purpose. It was the weight of Toshinori's faith in him. It was the promise of a future he had never, ever dared to dream of. He was still afraid. A part of him, the small, bullied child, was screaming in terror at the looming procedure, at the pain, at the unknown. But another part of him, the part that had run towards the sludge villain, the part that had impressed the HPSC, the part that All Might believed in, was stronger. He leaned closer to his reflection, the boy in the mirror staring back with an unfamiliar intensity. He took a deep, steadying breath, the air tasting of antiseptic and ozone. The boy in the mirror did the same. They were one. They were ready. He whispered the words to his reflection, not as a question, not as a desperate plea, but as a vow. A quiet, unbreakable promise to himself, to All Might, and to the world he was about to carry on his shoulders. I can be a hero. The morning of the procedure dawned not with sunlight, but with the artificial, unwavering glow of medical lighting. Izuku hadn't slept. He had lain awake on the thin, firm mattress of his bed gurney, listening to the rhythmic, electronic sigh of the ventilation system and the distant, reassuring beep of his own heart on a monitor he couldn't see. Fear was a cold, heavy thing in the pit of his stomach, but beneath it, like a pilot light in a storm, was a stubborn flicker of exhilaration. Today was the day his life truly began. Today, he would be reborn. He repeated Toshinori's words to himself, a mantra against the sterile silence. Your spirit is already a superpower. The serum, it's just giving your spirit a body that can keep up with it. He clung to that. His body, this frail, corkless vessel that had always been a source of shame, was about to become his greatest ally. It would become a fortress, a weapon, a shield for the innocent. He envisioned it with the same meticulous detail he applied to his notebooks, bones hardening to the density of tungsten, muscles weaving into cables of impossible strength, blood flowing with a payload of liquid energy. The door hissed open, and a team of 3 medical technicians entered, their faces obscured by light blue surgical masks. Their movements were efficient, practiced, and impersonal. They spoke to him in calm, measured tones, but their words were commands, not conversation. Time to prep, Candidate Midoriya. Please remove the scrubs and lie flat on the gurney. We will be attaching the final monitoring leads now. Izuku obeyed without a word, his skin prickling with goosebumps in the cool air. They worked around him with practiced ease, attaching adhesive pads to his chest, his temples, his arms. Each one was connected by a wire to a larger machine, a rolling monolith of screens and blinking lights that would serve as the command center for his transformation. Cold, clear gel was squirted onto his skin before each application, making him flinch. He felt less like a boy and more like a circuit board being readied for installation. As they worked, a new figure entered the room. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and dark hair pulled back in a neat, professional style. She wore a pristine white lab coat over her scrubs, a data pad held in her hand. Her name tag read, Dr. Arasugawa, Head of Biochemical Research. She was the chief architect of the perfected serum. Good morning, Midoriya-kun, she said, her voice possessing a calm authority that instantly commanded the room. Are you ready? He found his voice, surprised it didn't shake. Yes, doctor, she offered a small, confident smile. Excellent. Your vitals are perfect. Your body is in peak baseline condition. All simulations have yielded a 99.8% probability of success. The highest we've ever achieved, she tapped her data pad. I will be overseeing the infusion from the control room. The process will begin with a mild sedative to calm any involuntary muscle spasms. Then, the catalyst agent will be introduced to prepare your cells. Finally, the Plus Ultra serum itself. You will feel a sensation of intense warmth, then pressure, as your body begins its metamorphosis. It will be uncomfortable, but not unbearable. The entire process should take no more than 12 minutes. Do you have any last questions? Izuku's mind, usually a whirlwind of inquiries, was strangely blank. There was only one thing he needed to know. Will All Might be here? Dr. Arasugawa's expression softened for a fraction of a second. He is watching from the observation gallery, along with President Yoroi. You have his full support. That was enough. That was everything. Izuku nodded, laid his head back against the stiff pillow, and stared up at the perforated ceiling tiles, trying to count them. 1, 2, 3. Administering sedative, a tech announced. A cool liquid flowed into the 4-line already taped to the back of his hand. The sharp edges of his anxiety began to blur. The cold dread in his stomach didn't vanish, but it felt distant. He was floating, calm and untethered, his focus narrowing to a single point of light on the ceiling. This was it. Goodbye, Deku. From the observation gallery above, the medical theater looked like a scene from a science fiction film. The room was circular, bathed in a clean, shadowless light. In the center, Izuku Midoriya was a small, still figure on the operating table, surrounded by a constellation of gleaming chrome and humming machinery. A dozen scientists and technicians in blue scrubs moved with quiet purpose, their faces focused on the glowing monitors that displayed every facet of Izuku's biology. Toshinori Yagi stood at the thick, armored glass, his knuckles white where he gripped the safety rail. He was in his skeletal form, the oversized suit hanging loosely from his frame. Beside him, President Yoroi stood with her arms crossed, her posture as rigid and unyielding as the reinforced concrete walls. He looked so small, Toshinori murmured, his voice tight with a paternal anxiety that felt alien and overwhelming. Size is irrelevant. His genetic markers are ideal. His psychological resilience is off the charts, Yoroi stated, her eyes fixed on the main screen displaying Izuku's heart rate. Dr. Arasugawa is the best in her field. This will be a textbook success. In 12 minutes you will be looking at your successor. Toshinori didn't reply. He just watched, his own heart aching with a mixture of hope and guilt. He was pinning the future of the entire world on this brave, kind-hearted boy. He prayed he was right. He prayed the boy would not break under the weight of the gift they were about to give him. Sedative administered. Subject is stable. Dr. Arasugawa's voice echoed calmly through the gallery's intercom. Beginning infusion of the catalyst agent. This will prime his cellular receptors for the serum. Stand by. On the table below, Izuku felt a second, different kind of coolness enter his veins. It was sharp, almost minty. A strange tingling sensation spread through his body, starting from his chest and radiating outwards to his fingertips and toes. It wasn't unpleasant. It felt like anticipation, like his very cells were waking up, stretching after a long sleep, ready for what came next. He could feel a low hum, a vibration that seemed to emanate from his own bones. It's starting, he thought, a thrill cutting through the sedative's haze. My body is getting ready. In the control room, Dr. Arasugawa watched her monitors with satisfaction. Catalyst uptake is optimal. All biomarkers are green. He's responding perfectly. Prepare the primary infusion. A technician carefully lifted a syringe from a refrigerated, lead-lined case. The liquid inside was a brilliant, shimmering aquamarine, glowing with a soft internal light of its own. It looked alive. It looked like bottled starlight. The Plus Ultra Serum. Primary infusion commencing in 3, 2, 1. The world dissolved into fire. It was not the warmth the doctor had promised. It was a searing, all-consuming heat that erupted in his chest and shot through his veins like molten lava. The sedative was burned away in an instant, leaving his every nerve ending screaming. His back arched off the table with a strangled gasp, the restraining straps digging painfully into his wrists and ankles. Pain, pain, pain. His mind, once so clear, fractured into a million terrified shards. This wasn't right. This wasn't a metamorphosis. This was an invasion. He could feel the serum, this alien, incandescent thing, trying to force its way into his cells, trying to rewrite him. But his body, his stupid, stubborn, quirkless body, was fighting back. It was a war being waged in his blood. He could feel it. The tingling sensation from the catalyst agent curdled, turning into a feeling of grinding glass. The fire of the serum was met with an equal and opposite force, a bone-deep, glacial cold. His own immune system, his own life's force, was rising up like an army to repel the intruder. Fire and ice clashed in every artery, every capillary. His muscles spasmed violently, his teeth clenched so hard he thought they would crack. A high-pitched keen escaped his lips, a sound of pure agony. In the gallery, Toshinori slammed his fist against the glass. What's happening? Something's wrong! Yoroi's face was a mask of cold fury. Arasugawa, report! The calm, professional voice from the intercom was gone, replaced with one of frantic urgency. Massive, unforeseen biological conflict. His immune system is attacking the serum. It's not incorporating, it's treating it like a virus. A supervirus. Alarms began to blare, shrill and piercing, red lights flashing across the pristine white room. Vitals are spiking! A technician shouted from the floor. Blood pressure is 240 over 160. Tachycardia at 220. He's going into shock. His cells... Arasugawa's voice was strained, filled with disbelief. His cells are actively metabolizing the formula. They're breaking it down, neutralizing it. It's impossible. The catalyst agent should have prevented this. His biosignature was a perfect match. Below, Izuku's world was a red and black vortex of agony. The battle inside him reached a fever pitch. He felt a tearing sensation, as if his very soul was being ripped in two. He wasn't just in pain, he was pain. And through it all, a single, horrifying thought cut through the static: it's rejecting me. My own body is rejecting my dream. He's convulsing. I can't get a stable reading. His temperature is fluctuating wildly. 42 degrees Celsius. Now 35. Now 40. It's a cytokine storm. Arasugawa yelled over the din. A full-blown systemic autoimmune cascade. His body is going to tear itself apart trying to fight this. Abort the infusion. I repeat, abort. A technician scrambled to stop the syringe pump, but it was too late. The full dose was in. It doesn't matter! Another scientist cried out, his voice cracking. His immune system, my God, it's winning! It's destroying the serum. The energy release from the neutralization, it's causing systemic cellular damage. He's burning out from the inside. Toshinori could only watch in horror as the boy on the table thrashed, his small body fighting a war on a scale no human was ever meant to endure. The promise, the hope, the bright future, all of it was dissolving into a nightmare of flashing lights and panicked shouting. We're losing him, Arisugawa said, her voice now dangerously quiet. His heart rate is dropping. Fast, the frantic peaks on the monitor plummeted. 180. 120. 80. He's crashing. BP is bottoming out. 40. 20. Then, the most terrifying sound of all. A single, long, monotonous tone that cut through all the other noise. The line on the heart monitor was flat. Flat. Asystole. He's flatlined. For a single, horrifying second, the entire room froze. The project, the dream, the boy, all dead. Toshinori let out a guttural roar of despair, a sound of pure anguish that came from the deepest part of his soul. He hammered on the glass, no longer caring about his composure, about the president beside him. Do something! Save him! Save the boy! The shout seemed to break the spell. Get the defibrillator! Now! Arisugawa commanded, her professionalism snapping back into place like a shield. Push one of AP now! Charge to 360! The team below moved with desperate speed. They ripped open Izuku's medical gown, exposing his chest. Clear! Izuku's body jumped as the electricity surged through him, a grotesque parody of life. Nothing. The flatline tone continued its mournful drone. Again! Charge! Toshinori watched, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks, his breath hitched in his throat. Please, my boy. Please fight. Don't let it end like this. Please. Clear! Another violent jump. The line on the monitor blipped. Once. Twice. Then, a weak, thready rhythm began to pick up. Unsteady but there. Thump 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 thump. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief went through the medical team. We have a rhythm. A tech breathed out, his voice shaking. Sinus bradycardia, but it's a rhythm. Dr. Arisugawa sagged against her console in the control room, her face pale. Stabilize him. Get him on full life support. I want a complete systemic analysis. Find out what's left of the serum, and what in God's name happened to him. In the observation gallery, Toshinori slid down the wall, his legs no longer able to support him. He sat on the cold floor, his head in his hands, shaking uncontrollably. He had almost killed him. He had taken this bright, hopeful child and nearly snuffed him out. President Yoroi stood over him, her expression unreadable, but her voice was like ice. It's over, Toshinori, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The asset is compromised. The candidate is a reject. He's alive. Toshinori choked out, looking up at her with pleading, desperate eyes. We can try again when he's recovered. Yoroi's gaze was pitiless. Try what? Feeding him more poison? His body didn't just resist the serum. Arisugawa's initial readings suggested developed a hyper-efficient method to eradicate it. It treated our miracle cure like a common cold, and one. Giving him another dose wouldn't just be foolish. It would be murder. His unique biology makes him fundamentally, permanently incompatible. She turned her gaze back to the window, where the team was now working to encase the unconscious Izuku in a web of tubes and wires, keeping his fragile body alive. The subject is a failure, she stated, the words as final as a death sentence. The project has failed. We are scrubbing him from the program. We will find another way. We always do. She turned and walked towards the exit without a backward glance, leaving Toshinori alone with the wreckage of their shared dream. Izuku drifted in a gray, timeless limbo. There was no pain, no thought, just a muffled, dreamless void. He was vaguely aware of muted sounds, of soft pressures, of a tube in his throat that breathed for him. Time had no meaning. Hours or years could have passed. He woke up slowly, like a swimmer rising from the deepest part of the ocean. The first thing to return was sound. The steady, rhythmic beep of a monitor. It was slower than he remembered. Much slower. The next was sight. Blurry shapes swam into focus. A white ceiling. An floor stand with several bags hanging from it, their contents dripping slowly into his arm. The stark, sterile walls of an infirmary room. He was alone. He tried to take a deep breath, but a dry, painful cough rattled in his chest. The breathing tube was gone. He swallowed, his throat feeling raw and scratchy. He was alive. The memory of the procedure came back in a tidal wave of fire and ice, a phantom agony that made him flinch. The alarms. The shouting. The flat line. Had he died? He tried to sit up, to take stock of himself. And that's when the true horror began. It wasn't a sharp pain, like a broken bone or a cut. It was a deep, fundamental wrongness. A profound, crushing weakness that seemed to emanate from his very marrow. The simple act of engaging his core muscles to sit up sent a wave of dizziness and nausea through him so intense that the room tilted violently. His arms, when he tried to push himself up, trembled under the weight of just his own torso, his muscles feeling like wet paper. He collapsed back onto the pillow, gasping for breath, his heart hammering a slow, sluggish, heavy beat in his chest. Thump, thump, thump. It felt tired. Everything felt tired, but the weakness was only half of it. The other half was the pain. It was a low, constant, grinding ache. It was in his bones, a deep, resonant throb like a constant toothache in his skeleton. It was in his joints, which felt swollen and stiff, protesting every tiny movement. It was a full-body exhaustion that went beyond simple fatigue, a cellular weariness that felt ancient and irreversible. He was weaker than before. He was in more pain than he had ever known. The serum hadn't just failed to make him stronger, it had broken him. It had taken his baseline, his normal, and shattered it, leaving him with something less. Something damaged. He lifted a hand in front of his face. It trembled, the movement jerky and uncontrolled. This was his hand. These were his fingers. But they felt alien, disconnected. He tried to make a fist, a simple act he'd done thousands of times. His fingers curled slowly, painfully, protesting the motion. The strength he could summon was pathetic. A child could resist this grip. A single, cold tear traced a path from the corner of his eye, down his temple, and into his hair. The dream wasn't just dead. It had been a lie. He wasn't the chosen one. He was a biological error. A reject. The door opened and Dr. Arasugawa walked in. Her face was drawn, the confidence she had exuded before the procedure replaced by a weary professionalism. She held a datapad, but she didn't look at it. She looked at him. "Midoriya-kun," she said, her voice soft. "I see you're awake. How are you feeling?" The question was so absurd, so clinical, that a broken, watery laugh escaped Izuka's lips. "I feel." He couldn't finish. What was the word for this? Annihilated? "You've been unconscious for 3 days," she continued, filling the silence. "You suffered a severe systemic shock. To be blunt, you died on the table. We were able to resuscitate you." "The serum," Izuka whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "What happened?" Dr. Arasugawa finally looked down at her datapad, as if consulting a script. "What happened was an unprecedented immunological rejection. Your body did not assimilate the serum. It identified the myoregenerative catalysts as a foreign pathogen and mounted a defense of shocking efficiency. Your immune cells synthesized a complex counteragent on the fly and systematically dismantled the plus-ultra formula at a molecular level." She looked up, a flicker of something, scientific awe perhaps, in her eyes. "We've never seen anything like it. It's a 1 in a trillion biological anomaly. Your body didn't just reject the serum, Izuku, it annihilated it. It treated the most advanced bioenhancement agent on Earth as if it were influenza and cured itself in under 90 seconds. Cured itself." The words hung in the air, thick with a terrible irony. "But the battle," she continued, her tone becoming clinical again. "The massive energy expenditure required to neutralize the formula has had consequences. It has caused widespread, low-level cellular damage, Your nervous system is frayed. Your mitochondrial efficiency has been drastically reduced. The process has induced a chronic inflammatory response in your joints and musculoskeletal system. She took a breath. In layman's terms, the fight your body won has left you with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and a significantly weakened constitution. Your physical baseline is now approximately 60% of what it was before the procedure. 60%. He was barely more than half the person he used to be. The weakness, the pain, the exhaustion, it wasn't temporary. It was permanent. This was his new reality. The dam broke. The last vestiges of his hope, his pride, his dream, crumbled to dust. Sobs racked his broken body, each one sending a fresh wave of grinding pain through his bones. He was a failure. A reject. A broken toy to be swept aside. He had been given the chance of a lifetime, a ticket to godhood, and his own body, his own traitorous cells, had torn it up in his face. He wasn't just quirkless anymore. He was less than quirkless. He was an invalid. Dr. Arasugawa watched him cry, her expression unchanged. She placed the datapad on his bedside table. The HPSC will handle your aftercare arrangements. A representative will be here to debrief you tomorrow. She turned and walked out, leaving Izuku Midoriya alone in the white room, drowning in the ruins of his own body, the slow, tired beep of the heart monitor the only soundtrack to his utter and complete despair. The world returned to Izuku Midoriya not in a rush, but in a series of harsh, unforgiving snapshots. The rhythmic beep of the infirmary monitor. The weary face of Dr. Arasugawa, the phantom echo of a flatline tone that haunted the edges of his hearing. And now, this, a room so devoid of character it felt like an insult. It was a debriefing room, a cube of gray walls, gray carpet, and a gray metal table. It was designed to leach emotion from any conversation, to render human drama down to sterile facts. He sat in a hard-backed chair that was agony on his spine, a constant, grinding ache radiating from his tailbone up to the base of his skull. 2 days had passed since he'd awoken. 2 days of being monitored, tested, and assessed like a failed piece of equipment. Now came the final disposition. Across the table sat President Yoroi. Today she wore a charcoal gray suit, if anything even more severe than the last. Her silver hair was a helmet of perfect discipline. Beside her was a man Izuku hadn't seen before, a thin, weasel-faced man in a pinstriped suit holding a leather briefcase. A lawyer. The final, undeniable proof that this was not a medical consultation, but a severance. Midoriya-san. President Yoroi began, her voice as flat and lifeless as the room. We are here to finalize your discharge from the care of the Hero Public Safety Commission. Your physical condition has stabilized. While you are no longer in critical danger, our medical staff have concluded that your condition is chronic and irreversible. You are deemed unfit for any further participation in the project. The words were delivered like stones, each one a heavy, bruising impact. Unfit. Chronic. Irreversible. The project has been officially terminated in relation to your candidacy. She continued, steepling her fingers. Her gaze was distant, as if she were discussing a faulty server rack. As such, we must address the matter of your accrued classified knowledge. The lawyer slid a thick document across the table. The cover page was stark, bearing the HPSC logo and the words, Non-Disclosure Settlement Agreement. This document, the lawyer said, his voice slick and oily, binds you to perpetual silence regarding Project Plus Ultra, the nature of All Might's power, the existence of this facility, and the events of the past 10 days. You will not speak of it, write of it, or communicate it in any fashion, to any living soul, for the remainder of your natural life. He gave a thin, reptilian smile. The penalties for breach are substantial. Treason is not a charge the Commission takes lightly. Izuku stared at the document. The pen beside it felt like it weighed 100 kilograms. His hand trembled just thinking about lifting it. He wasn't just being discarded. He was being gagged and erased. He would be a ghost, haunted by a secret he could never share. There is also the matter of your official cover story, President Yoroi said, her tone indicating this was a minor logistical detail. You were recruited for an advanced, experimental youth training program under the HPSC's purview. The regimen proved too strenuous for your physiology, resulting in muscular and neurological strain. You washed out. It's a simple, believable narrative that accounts for your decline. You will adhere to it strictly. Decline. The word was so clinical, so dismissive of the ruin they had made of him. He wasn't a person who had suffered. He was a stock that had declined in value. Finally, the lawyer piped up again, opening his briefcase with a sharp click. He slid a single plastic card across the table. It was a debit card, glossy and black. The commission is not without compassion. In consideration for your participation, and to assist with any future medical needs related to your condition, the HPSC has authorized a lifetime medical stipend. A generous sum will be deposited into this account monthly. It is more than sufficient to cover any palliative care you may require. Hush money. A pittance to pay for the painkillers he would need for the rest of his life. A life they had broken. A deep, cold anger began to smolder in the pit of Izuku's stomach, a tiny ember in the vast, gray ash of his despair. It wasn't enough to make him shout, but it was enough to make him look up, to meet President Yoroi's gaze. Why? He asked, his voice a raw, cracked whisper. Why me? If you knew this could happen, Yoroi's expression didn't flicker. We did not know this could happen. Your unique biological response was an anomaly outside of all predictive models. An aberration. As for why you were chosen, you were, on paper, the perfect candidate. The potential reward was deemed worth the acceptable risk. Her eyes were cold, hard chips of obsidian. The calculation was incorrect. That is all. We are correcting the error. Correcting the error. That's what he was. An error to be corrected, an equation to be balanced by signing a form and accepting a payout. He reached for the pen. His fingers, clumsy and stiff, fumbled with it for a moment before he could get a proper grip. The tremor in his hand was worse now. He stared at the signature line. Izuku Midoriya. He remembered the pride he'd felt seeing his name on the datapad just over a week ago. Candidate profile, Izuku Midoriya. Now, his name felt like a brand, a mark of failure. His signature was a spidery, broken thing, a pale imitation of his usual neat script. It was the signature of a stranger. When he was done, the lawyer whisked the document away, tucking it safely back into his briefcase as if it were a precious artifact. Excellent. Your personal effects have been gathered. A car is waiting to take you home. The HPSC thanks you for your service, Midoriya-san. The finality of it was absolute. He was pushed back out of the car that had brought him here with such promise. This time, the ride was silent for a different reason. Before, it was a silence of anticipation and state-enforced secrecy. Now, it was the silence of a funeral procession. The city lights streaked past the window, but they no longer looked like promises. They looked like distant, unattainable stars, a universe from which he had been permanently exiled. The black car didn't even pull up to the curb. It stopped in the middle of the street in front of his apartment building, the engine still running. The door was open for him, a clear, silent command to exit. He stepped out, his backpack feeling impossibly heavy on his shoulders, and the car pulled away without a sound, melting back into the city traffic as if it had never been there at all. He was home. He was free. And he had never felt more alone or more imprisoned in his life. He stood for a long moment on the pavement, staring up at the familiar, unassuming building. He'd lived here his whole life. But now it looked alien. The biggest challenge of his life wasn't a villain or a disaster. It was the single flight of stairs up to his front door. He put his hand on the railing, the cool metal a stark contrast to the hot, inflammatory ache in his joints. He took the first step. Pain shot up from his ankle to his knee, a sharp, stabbing sensation. He gritted his teeth and took another. His lungs, which used to power him through 5-kilometer runs, were already burning, demanding more air than they could process. By the time he reached the top of the landing, a journey of maybe 15 seconds, he was leaning heavily against the wall, slick with a sheen of sweat, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. This was his life now. A flight of stairs was a mountain. A short walk was a marathon. He fumbled for his keys, his trembling fingers making the simple task a frustrating ordeal. Finally, he got the door open and stumbled inside. Izuku? His mother's voice was a shot of pure relief. She came rushing out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her face a mess of tears and smiles. Oh, Izuku! You're home! They called and said you were coming home today, but I didn't. Oh, my baby! She threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. Izuku nearly buckled under the simple force of her embrace. He tried to hug her back, but his arms felt heavy and weak. He could feel the fine tremor running through his entire body. Inko pulled back, her joyful expression melting into one of concern. She put a hand to his cheek. Izuku? You're so pale. And you've lost weight. Are you all right? The program, was it that hard? The lie sat on his tongue, heavy and toxic. He looked into his mother's worried eyes, the only person in the world who loved him unconditionally, and he fed her the story the commission had prepared. Yeah, Mom, he said, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. It was really intense. The physical strain, it was too much for me. I washed out. The words tasted like ash. He watched her process them, watched the flicker of disappointment in her eyes be immediately smothered by a wave of maternal love and concern. Oh, honey, she said, her voice soft as she pulled him into another, gentler hug. That's all right. You tried your best, that's all that matters. I'm just so glad you're home and you're safe. We'll get you fattened up in no time. I'll make you a big bowl of katsudon. He just nodded, burying his face in her shoulder, the familiar scent of her apron a painful reminder of a life, a self, that no longer existed. He was a stranger in his own home, a liar to his own mother, an actor playing the part of Izuku Midoriya. And the performance was exhausting him. The first few days were a study in misery. He spent most of his time in his room, the All Might-themed sanctuary that had once been his source of inspiration. Now, it was a torture chamber of irony. The iconic, smiling face of the symbol of peace seemed to mock him from every poster. The powerful, dynamic poses of the action figures on his shelves were a testament to a strength he had reached for and fallen short of, shattering himself in the process. The motto, Plus Ultra, emblazoned on a banner above his desk, was a cruel joke. He tried to go back to his old routines. He pulled out his workout log, looked at the weights he used to lift, the distances he used to run, and a hollow, aching laugh escaped him. He couldn't even lift his school backpack without his shoulders screaming in protest. He tried to write in his notebook, his one true solace. He picked up Hero Analysis for the Future number 14, and opened it to a blank page. He wanted to analyze the debut of a new hero he'd seen on the news, but his hand shook so badly his writing was an illegible scrawl. His thoughts, usually so clear and sharp, were clouded by a fog of fatigue. He couldn't concentrate. The pain was a constant, distracting static in the back of his mind. After 10 minutes of frustrated effort, he slammed the notebook shut, a wave of impotent rage washing over him. They hadn't just broken his body, they had broken his mind. They had taken the one thing that made him special and dulled its edge. His mother tried her best. She cooked his favorite meals, which he could only pick at, his appetite stolen by nausea and medication. She fluffed his pillows and asked if he needed anything, her face a constant mask of worried love. He knew he was breaking her heart, and the guilt was another layer of weight on his already overburdened soul. On the third day after his return, the doorbell rang. "I'll get it!" his mother called out. Izuku was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to find a position where his back didn't feel like it was full of ground glass. He heard the door open, followed by his mother's surprised, respectful gasp. "Oh! Please come in!" He heard footsteps, one set his mother's, the other, slow, deliberate, accompanied by the faint sound of labored breathing. He knew that sound. A cold dread, colder than any he'd felt yet, washed over him. The door to his bedroom creaked open. Standing in the doorway, looking impossibly frail and gaunt under the warm, domestic lighting, was Tashinori Yagi. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore simple, loose-fitting clothes, a plain t-shirt and track pants, that did nothing to hide the skeletal reality of his form. His eyes were sunken, ringed with dark circles of exhaustion and guilt. He looked as broken as Izuku felt. "Midoriya, my boy," he said, his voice a low, raspy whisper. Izuku just stared at him. He didn't sit up. He didn't have the energy. He just lay there, a portrait of failure, looking at the man who had offered him the world and then watched as it was ripped away. Tashinori stepped fully into the room, closing the door softly behind him. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. All the posters of All Might's smiling face seemed to press in on them. I came to see how you were, Tashinori said, his gaze falling on the collection of his own merchandise with a pained expression. He looked anywhere but at the boy in the bed. I'm fine, Izuku said. The lie was automatic now, a reflex. His voice was flat, empty. No, you're not, Tashinori said softly. He finally met Izuku's eyes, and the raw, undisguised guilt in them was a physical blow. I am so sorry, my boy. I am so sorry. This is my fault. I pushed for you. I put you in that room. I put that poison in your veins. The apology hung in the air, but it offered no comfort. It was just words. It couldn't knit his cells back together or silence the constant thrum of pain in his bones. It wasn't your fault, Izuku said, the emptiness in his voice giving way to a low, bitter heat. I was biologically unsuitable. A 1 in a trillion anomaly. A calculation error. That's what the president said. Tashinori flinched as if struck. The commission, they do not see people. They see assets and variables. But I saw you. I saw your heart. I truly believed. I believed the serum would be a vessel for your spirit. I never imagined. He trailed off, coughing into his hand, a racking, painful sound. Did you have a backup? Izuku asked, the question sharp and cruel. He didn't recognize his own voice. While I was lying on that table, dying, were you already looking through the files for the next candidate? No. Of course not, Tashinori insisted, his voice cracking with anguish. But then his eyes faltered. He looked away, and in that small, almost imperceptible movement, Izuku had his answer. The anger in his gut flared hotter. So you have one now? He pressed, sitting up despite the scream of protest from his spine. The room swam for a second, but he ignored it. You've already found my replacement? Tashinori's shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked like a man confessing to a terrible crime. The commission, they never stop. They consider the failure of one candidate to be a data point, not an end. They have identified another potential candidate. A young man from a similar background. Quirkless, but with incredible physical prowess and a heroic heart. The final pillar of Izuku's world crumbled into dust. It wasn't just that he had failed. It was that his failure was so insignificant, so meaningless, that they had already moved on. He was a footnote, a discarded prototype. The new model was already on the assembly line. I see, Izuku said, and the coldness in his own voice scared him. So this is goodbye then. You came to apologize, to clear your conscience before you go off to mentor your new, better son. Izuku, no, it's not like that, Tashinori pleaded, taking a step closer. The HPSC has forbidden me from having any further contact with you. This visit. I am violating a direct order by being here. They see you as a failed state secret, a liability. They want you erased. Forgotten. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unassuming flip phone. It was an old burner model. If you ever need anything at all, and you can't, if the stipend isn't enough, you call this number. It will come directly to me. No one else. He placed it on the bedside table, next to the untouched glass of water. It was a kind gesture. A desperate, heartfelt, utterly useless gesture. It couldn't fix him. It couldn't give him back his life. You should go, Izuku said, his voice thick. He lay back down, turning his face to the wall. He couldn't look at his hero anymore. He couldn't look at the man who was both his greatest champion and the architect of his ruin. He heard Tashinori hesitate, heard the soft intake of breath as if he wanted to say more. But there was nothing left to say. The silence stretched, filled only by the quiet hum of Izuku's all-might-themed mini-fridge. Then, the sound of slow, defeated footsteps. The soft click of the bedroom door opening, and then closing. He was gone. The final tie was severed. He was truly, completely, utterly alone. Izuku lay there, staring at the wall, at the faint patterns in the wallpaper. He didn't cry. He was beyond tears. He was in a place of profound, hollow emptiness. The pain in his body was a distant roar, a background noise to the absolute silence in his soul. He didn't know how long he lay there. Minutes or hours. But eventually, a sound penetrated his stupor. It was the sound of his mother, quietly sobbing in the other room. She was trying to stifle it, but he could hear it. She was crying for him. For the bright, energetic boy she had lost. And that, finally, was what broke him. He pushed himself off the bed, his legs shaking violently. Every movement was a fresh ordeal. He stumbled out of his room, his sanctuary of failure, and into the hallway. He saw his mother in the living room, her back to him, her shoulders shaking as she tried to fold laundry. He took a step. Another. His legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees on the soft carpet of the living room floor, the impact sending a jarring shock through his entire skeleton. He didn't have the strength to get up. His mother turned at the sound, her eyes wide with alarm. She saw him there, crumpled on the floor, a broken thing, his face a mask of utter despair. "Izuku!" she cried, rushing to his side, the laundry forgotten. She knelt in front of him, her hands hovering, not knowing where to touch without causing him more pain. He looked up at her, and the dam of his control, the cold, empty wall he had built around his heart, shattered into a million pieces. A sound tore from his throat, a raw, wounded cry that was the culmination of every scrap of pain, every broken promise, every ounce of loss he had endured. "Mom!" he sobbed, the word barely intelligible. He reached for her, his weak arms wrapping around her waist as he buried his face in her stomach. "Mom!" She immediately wrapped her arms around his shaking shoulders, holding him tight, rocking him gently as if he were a small child again. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't press for details of the training program. She just held him, absorbing his grief, her own tears falling silently into his messy green hair. He cried for the strength he'd lost. He cried for the future that had been stolen. He cried for the hero he would never be, for the pain that was his new, constant companion. He cried for the lie he had to live, and for the secret that was festering inside him like a cancer. He cried for the boy on the table, and for the man who had left him behind. He clung to his mother, the only solid thing in his collapsing world, and let out all the poison, all the grief, all the rage, until his voice was raw and his lungs ached. And when he could finally speak again, he whispered the words, the core of his agony, into the fabric of her apron. It was supposed to be me. The world, for Izuku Midoriya, had shrunk. It was no longer a vibrant landscape of heroes and villains, of grand battles and soaring hopes. It was the four walls of his bedroom. It was the distance from his bed to the bathroom, a trek that felt like scaling a mountain. It was the small, white, chalky pills he had to swallow 3 times a day, their bitter taste a constant reminder of his failure. Months passed in a gray, monotonous blur, each day a carbon copy of the last. Autumn bled into a cold, bleak winter. The calendar pages turned, but Izuku remained static, a ship run aground, rusting in the shallows while the rest of the world sailed on. His mornings began not with an alarm clock, but with a slow, creeping awareness of pain. It was a dull, foundational ache in his bones, a grinding stiffness in his joints that made the simple act of sitting up a carefully negotiated ordeal. He'd swing his legs over the side of the bed and pause, waiting for the wave of dizziness to pass, for the black spots to clear from his vision. His body, once a tool he had honed with tireless dedication, was now a cage of chronic pain and profound, cellular weariness. The boy who used to cram in a 5-kilometer run before school now celebrated the victory of making it to the kitchen without having to lean against the wall for support. His mother, Inko, orbited him with a quiet, heartbreaking solicitude. She never mentioned his weakness, never commented on the tremor in his hands that made holding a glass of water a two-handed operation. She just adapted. She moved his favorite mug to a lower shelf. She bought pre-chopped vegetables. She laid out his daily cocktail of anti-inflammatories and nerve pain blockers next to his breakfast without a word. Her unspoken grief was a constant presence, a silent scream in the quiet apartment that was far louder than any of Izuku's own pained groans. He was drowning, and she was doing everything she could to keep his head above water, even as he felt himself sinking deeper into the cold, dark abyss of his own broken body. The guilt of what he was putting her through was a separate, sharper pain, a constant counterpoint to the dull throb in his limbs. His connection to the outside world, to the hero society he had once worshipped, came through the television screen. He'd sit on the sofa, a thick blanket wrapped around his shoulders, and watch the news. He saw heroes leap and fly, their powers brilliant bursts of color against the gray cityscape. He saw them saving people, stopping villains, smiling for the cameras. And then, one day, he saw him. The broadcast showed a daring daylight rescue from a burning skyscraper. A new hero, blazing onto the scene. He was a golden blur of power and charisma. He moved with impossible speed, his strength overwhelming. He carried 3 people to safety at once, his face alight with a wide, confident, reassuring smile that felt hauntingly familiar. The news churn identified him. Lemillion, the new symbol of hope? It was him. The replacement. The new candidate. The boy with the heroic heart and incredible physical prowess that Tashinori had spoken of. He was everything Izuku was supposed to be. He was the successful experiment, the perfected product. He was strong, he was fast, he was everything the serum had promised. Izuku watched, his hands clenched into weak, trembling fists on his lap. He felt a toxic, curdling mix of emotions roil in his gut. There was the bitter sting of jealousy, so sharp it tasted like acid. There was the crushing weight of his own inadequacy, a familiar and heavy cloak. But beneath it all, to his own profound surprise, there was a flicker of something else. Admiration. Lemillion was good. He was really good. He wasn't just powerful, he was smart. He used his strength with precision, minimizing collateral damage, his movements efficient and his smile a genuine beacon in the chaos. He was a true hero. He was the hero the world needed, and as Izuku watched Lemillion brace himself against the collapsing wall to give civilians time to escape, his analytical mind, the one part of him that hadn't been broken, kicked into gear out of pure, uncontrollable habit. His stance is perfect, the thought came unbidden. Low center of gravity, distributing the weight through his legs, not his back. But his boots, their standard issue hero gear, reinforced steel toe, but the soles have no kinetic dampening. All that shock, all that vibration from the impact, is traveling straight up his skeletal structure. Over time, that leads to microfractures, stress injuries. Even for a body enhanced by the serum, that's inefficient. It's wasted energy. It's a point of failure. The thought was like a key turning in a long-rusted lock. For months, his mind had been a fog of pain and fatigue. But now, a tiny patch of sky was clearing. If his boots had gyroscopic stabilizers and a multi-layered gel and polymer composite sole, he began to mutter, his voice a low, raspy hum. They could absorb and redistribute up to 70% of that impact shock. It wouldn't just protect his joints. It would make him more stable. He could hold more weight. Hold it for longer. The power source for the gyros could be piezoelectric, charged by the force of his own movements. No external battery needed. Self-sustaining. More efficient. His eyes, which had been dull and lifeless moments before, now held a spark. He looked around the room, his gaze landing on his desk. On the pile of untouched notebooks. Hero analysis for the future. They felt like relics from another life, artifacts of a dead dream. He pushed the blanket off, the movement sending a jolt of pain through his shoulders. He ignored it. He stood up, his legs shaking, and made the slow, deliberate pilgrimage to his desk. He didn't reach for the familiar, numbered notebooks. Instead, he pulled a fresh, blank one from the bottom of the stack. He sat down, the simple act winding him. He picked up a pen, his grip clumsy. But this time, he didn't try to write words. He began to draw. His first sketch was rough, a shaky outline of a combat boot. But then he began to add layers. He drew the gyroscopic stabilizer, a complex sphere of interlocking rings. He drew the cross-section of the sole, labeling the different layers of polymer and shock-absorbing gel. He added notes in the margins, calculations for optimal energy distribution, suggestions for lightweight, high-tensile materials. The tremor in his hand didn't vanish, but it lessened as he focused, his entire being narrowing down to the blueprint taking shape on the page. He wasn't analyzing the hero anymore. He was analyzing the hero's tools. The next day, he watched a segment on the aquatic hero, Selkie. He saw the drag created by his standard-issue communication gear. Within an hour, he had designed a streamlined, hydrodynamic comm unit shaped like a manta ray, with integrated sonar that would piggyback on Selkie's own quirk, amplifying its range. He saw the grappling hero, Rock Lock, struggle with line tension in high winds. He spent the rest of the afternoon designing a smart grapple system with micro-adjusting fins on the hook and a line made from a spider silk composite that could adjust its own tensile strength in response to barometric pressure changes. The fog in his mind was retreating, burned away by the familiar, welcome heat of obsessive analysis. The pain in his body was still there, a constant, unwelcome companion, but it was no longer the sole occupant of his consciousness. It was a background noise. The signal, the thing he was tuning into, was the endless, fascinating puzzle of hero support gear. He filled the new notebook in a week. He labeled it, not with a number, but with a title. Support Tech Analysis Optimization Volume 1. He had found a loophole. The world had told him he could not be a hero. The HPSC had cast him aside because his body was not a weapon. But what if he wasn't the weapon? What if he forged them? What if he couldn't be the shield, but he could design a better one? The thought was a lifeline. A fragile, slender thread of hope in the suffocating darkness. If he couldn't be the one on the field, he could still save the people who were. The decision to apply to UA High School was the first truly proactive choice Izuku had made in half a year. But he wasn't looking at the hero course application, with its legendary and impossible physical exam. He was looking at the application for the Department of Support. The support course. He brought the idea to his mother one evening over dinner. He'd managed to eat almost a full bowl of her katsudon, a small victory that had already brought a fragile smile to her face. "Mom," he began, setting his chopsticks down carefully. "I've been thinking about high school." Inko's smile tightened slightly. It was a subject they had both been avoiding. The assumption had always been UA's hero course or bust. Now, that dream was a crater. "Oh," she said, her voice cautiously neutral. "I want to apply to UA," he said. He saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. "Izuku, honey, after what happened at the training program, are you sure? Your body, not the hero course," he clarified quickly. "The support course. To build things. For heroes." Inko stared at him, confused. "The support course? But you've always wanted to be a hero." "I do," he said, and the conviction in his voice surprised even himself. "And this is a way. Mom, I've been watching the heroes on TV. I see things. Flaws. Inefficiencies. Ways they could be safer, better. Their gear, it holds them back. A hero can get hurt, or a civilian can get hurt, because their boots don't absorb enough shock, or their communication system fails, or their armor has a weak point. I can fix that." He slid his new notebook across the table. Inko picked it up hesitantly. She didn't understand the complex schematics or the frantic equations, but she saw the detail, the passion, the sheer volume of work. She saw the familiar, obsessive fire back in her son's eyes, a fire she thought had been extinguished forever. "If I can design a piece of equipment that saves a hero from a career-ending injury," he said, his voice growing stronger, "or that helps them rescue one more person than they could have otherwise, isn't that a kind of heroics too?" The logic was sound. It was the same selfless, analytical spirit she had always known, just channeled in a new, safer direction. He wasn't talking about throwing his already broken body into danger. He was talking about using his mind, his greatest gift. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in months, they were tears of relief, not sorrow. A path forward. A future. "Oh, Izuku," she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. Yes, of course it is. That's wonderful." The UE support course application was different. It required academic transcripts and a design portfolio. There was an exam, but it was a written test of mechanical aptitude, physics, and material sciences. Izuku submitted his application along with a high-quality scanned copy of his entire first volume of Support Tech Analysis Optimization. He didn't know if it would be enough. But as he sealed the envelope, he felt a flicker of the same nervous excitement he'd felt in that HPSC car. It was a quieter, more fragile hope this time, tempered by the harsh lessons of his failure. But it was there. It was real. The acceptance letter arrived on a crisp spring morning. He and his mother opened it together at the kitchen table, their hands trembling for different reasons. The iconic UA logo, a projection of Principal Nizu, who informed him of his acceptance with a cheerful, "Your design portfolio was one of the most innovative and comprehensive I have ever seen." Izuku didn't whoop or cry. He just let out a long, shuddering breath he felt like he'd been holding for 6 months. He looked at the letter, at the official seal of the best hero school in the world, and allowed himself a small, genuine smile. It wasn't the future he had dreamed of. But it was a future. And it was his. The support department workshop at UA was glorious, beautiful chaos. It was a cavernous space that smelled of ozone, hot metal, welding fumes, and a faint, sweet hint of burnt sugar from a student's failed experiment with rocket fuel. The air hummed with the sound of grinding, hammering, and the occasional, room-shaking boom that was usually followed by the gruff, long-suffering voice of their teacher, Power Loader. "If you blow a hole in my ceiling again, you're cleaning the entire workshop with a toothbrush." For Izuku, it was heaven. It was a place of creation, a vibrant, messy testament to human ingenuity. It was the polar opposite of the cold, sterile, white-walled HPSC facility where his dream had died. Here, dreams were being hammered into reality, one explosion at a time. He moved through the space slowly, his body a constant, aching reminder of his limitations. He couldn't haul heavy sheets of metal or operate the larger, more physically demanding machinery. His role, as it had become clear in the first few weeks, was as a diagnostician and designer. Students would bring him their half-finished projects, frustrated by a design flaw they couldn't pinpoint, and he, with his keen, analytical eye, would deconstruct it, find the point of failure, and sketch out a solution. He became the consultant, a quiet, mumbling boy who was preternaturally gifted at untangling engineering knots. And then he saw her. He had heard of her, of course. Mei Hatsum was a legend in the support course, a first-year student with the manic energy of a lightning storm and a complete disregard for personal safety. She was a whirlwind of pink dreadlocks, grease stains, and goggles that seemed permanently attached to her forehead. She was currently standing in the center of a cordoned-off test area, a pair of massive, complex gauntlets strapped to her arms. They were intricate things of chrome and brass, bristling with wires and pistons. "Behold!" she bellowed to no one in particular. "The ultimate in urban traversal technology! My beautiful babies, the high-tension acrobatic grappling gauntlets!" She aimed one gauntlet at a target on the far wall and fired. A grappling hook shot out with the force of a cannonball, trailing a thick cable. It slammed into the target with a deafening clang. "Direct hit!" she crowed. "Now for the retraction!" She hit a button on the gauntlet. With a sound like a jet engine spooling up, the cable began to retract. But it was too fast, too powerful. Instead of pulling her gracefully towards the wall, it yanked her off her feet. She shot across the room like a ragdoll, letting out a delighted woohoo, before slamming into the padded wall beneath the target with a muffled thump. She peeled herself off the wall, completely unfazed, a massive grin on her face. Incredible power! A few minor calibrations needed for the recoil dampening and motor torque, but the proof of concept is a resounding success. Another masterpiece from Hatsum Industries. Most students laughed, and went back to their own work. But Izuku just stared, his mind already spinning. He hadn't just seen a comical failure. He had seen a dozen design flaws. He saw the massive, inefficient power drain from the oversized motor, the lack of a proper gearing system for the retraction winch, the unergonomic grip that would cause massive wrist strain on a user without superhuman durability. Her concept was brilliant. Her execution was a disaster waiting to happen. He found himself walking towards her, his own notebook clutched in his hand. This was a bad idea. She was intense, loud, and clearly proud of her work. Criticizing it was probably a good way to get a wrench thrown at his head. He was used to being shot down, to his muttering being seen as weird and creepy. He stopped a few feet away from her. Hatsum-san? He began, his voice barely a squeak. She whirled around, her big yellow eyes magnified by her goggles zeroing in on him. Yes. You, the quiet mumble master. Have you come to gaze upon my genius? To bask in the glow of my latest baby? Ah, yes, it's very powerful, he stammered. And then, his brain took over. The social anxiety was overridden by the irresistible urge to fix the problem. The muttering started, low and fast. The power source is the main issue. You're using a standard lithium-ion battery pack, but the discharge rate for that kind of motor torque is unsustainable. You'd get maybe 3, 4 full power uses before it's completely drained. And the recoil isn't just a calibration issue, it's a fundamental design flaw. There's no kinetic dampening system in the housing. All the force is being transferred directly to the user's arm. You need to isolate the winch mechanism from the main chassis with shock-absorbing bushings, maybe even a small hydraulic buffer. He opened his notebook, his trembling fingers flying across the page as he sketched. And the motor is all wrong. It's built for raw power, not variable speed. If you implemented a planetary gear system, you could control the retraction speed precisely. A slow, powerful pull for heavy loads, or a fast, low-torque pull for quick repositioning. You could even add a secondary capacitor to store the energy from the initial shot's recoil, and use it to power the first few seconds of retraction, reducing the initial load on the main battery and increasing overall efficiency by at least 30%. He trailed off, suddenly aware that he'd been rambling for a full minute. Hatsum was silent, staring at him. Her grin was gone. Oh no. He'd done it. He'd insulted her baby. He braced himself for the explosion. Instead, her eyes widened. The grin that returned to her face was a thing of terrifying, manic joy. She snatched the notebook out of his hands, her eyes scanning his frantic sketches and notes. A secondary capacitor, planetary gears, hydraulic buffers. She breathed, her voice filled with a reverence Izuku had only ever heard people use when talking about All Might. She looked from the notebook to him, then back to the notebook. It's beautiful. It's elegant. It's perfect. She grabbed him by the shoulders, her grip surprisingly strong, and began to shake him enthusiastically. You! Mumble Master! You're not just a mumbler, you're a genius! Why are you just standing there? This is a breakthrough. We have work to do. She dragged him over to her workbench, a chaotic landscape of spare parts, exposed wires, and soldering irons. She shoved his notebook under a magnifying lamp and began pointing at his sketches. This capacitor idea! We can wire it in parallel with the main power line. And the gearing system. I have some old drone parts with a microplanetary gear set that would be perfect. We can rebuild the housing from a lighter polyalloy to offset the weight of the new components. Oh, this is going to be my greatest baby yet. Izuku stood there, stunned into silence, as this pink-haired force of nature began tearing her own creation apart, using his designs as her guide. She didn't see his analysis as criticism. She saw it as a free upgrade. She didn't see his muttering as weird. She heard the brilliant ideas within it. For the first time, someone saw his obsessive, analytical mind not as a strange tick, but as an invaluable asset. What's your name again? She asked, not looking up from her work. Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya. Midoriya! She declared, brandishing a wrench. You are now the head of the design and theory division of Hatsum Industries. I'll handle the building, you handle the brilliant ideas. Together, our babies will take over the world. A loud kaboom erupted from the other side of the workshop as another student's project met a fiery end. Smoke filled the air. Power Loader sighed heavily. May didn't even flinch. She just grinned at Izuku, her face smudged with grease, her eyes blazing with creative fire. Isn't this place the best? Izuku looked around at the glorious, productive chaos. He looked at the brilliant, insane girl who had just made him her partner. He looked down at his own hands, still trembling slightly, but now clutching a pen, ready to draw the next blueprint. The pain in his bones was still there. The weakness hadn't vanished. But for the first time in a long, long time, Izuku Midoriya felt a surge of something he thought he had lost forever. It wasn't the explosive power of a super soldier serum. It was a quiet, steady, and resilient strength. It was purpose. And as he picked up his pen and began to sketch the schematics for a better, safer, more heroic world, he felt, in a way he never could have anticipated, that he was finally, truly, becoming a hero.